Okay, I use it like this. Okay, today, the third lecture, we welcome ACCATTONE, and Carlo Menon is our speaker tonight. ACCATTONE is a magazine launched or founded in Belgium of two architects, of Sophie Daas, Carlo Menon, and two graphic designers. Yeah, it's an independent magazine, and it attempts to explore, with the specific use of the printed magazine, several themes of contemporary architecture at large. It is dedicated space for architecture documents, an interview, a visual essay, a drawing, a layout, as fragment of a montage transversal to the issue. So contents are manipulated, mostly through their visual condition. So it's not just about documenting things, it's also how they arrange it and how they are confronted to each other. Yeah, well, it's, I think in general, we invited also ACCATTONE because there's a link to our studio, BÂTIMENT, where students created a visual atlas. We're going to speak more about that upcoming week. So, Alexandre Trio, our recent guest professor, and shortly about, oh, this microphone, I'm sorry, I don't like this headset. Well, tonight Carlo Menon is here and going to explain the idea behind the magazine. And he's architect and researcher. He studied architecture in Italy and Belgium before attending the Master in Architectural History at the Barclay School starting in 2012. His main field of research is authorship in collaborative ventures such as architectural magazines and competitions, both intended as fields of conflictual representation producing a collective result. Yeah, in the recent past, he has organized competitions for the Belgian French-speaking government, including the call for creators for its pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2010. He currently lives between London and Brussels, where he participates in various projects involving teaching and also publishing. So thank you a lot for coming, and I'm also curious about the name ACCATTONE, because ACCATTONE, I think it's the translation is also Schmarotzer, Bettler, handholder. I'm curious if there's a certain link or a link to the film. Maybe you can speak about that as well. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation, Christina, and everybody for being here. This is the first time that we present the magazine in Germany. And as to answer your first question, ACCATTONE comes from Pasolini's movie, 1961. It is his first movie. But the reason why we call it that way is also because of the meaning, and the main character of the movie is a beggar. He's not a beggar lying on the corner of a street, but he's a beggar who asks you for a bit of your sandwich, for your last cigarettes. It is a kind of an active beggar. And it is not only a private joke, but as ACCATTONE is an independent magazine made by just 4 people, and we were kind of amateur when we started it. We felt a bit like beggars to go and ring at the architect's doorbell to ask for materials, of course for free, and without giving any guarantees whatsoever about, let's say, the series or the quality of the project. And so after issue 1, we found out that it is not only a one-way relationship with the contributors that we invite, because there is a kind of feedback and there is a kind of two-way relationships that establishes with the architects and the artists that we've been inviting so far. And another reason of why we liked ACCATTONE as the title for the magazine, actually there are several, but Pasolini at the time, he was an intellectual, but he was not a filmmaker. And he had things to say, but he couldn't really manage the cinematographic language. So there are camera movements, the actors used are not professional actors, are people from the street. The setting of the movie is Rome, and the particular neighborhoods in Rome, and not the Universal Studios like Cinecittà. And so this all contributed to make an analogy with our work, because we are architects, we have ideas to share, but we are not professional editors, nor publishers, nor magazine distributors, so we all try to do these magazines by ourselves. And so long, it's been 2 years since the first issue was published, and we are still learning how to do it, basically. I can give you a third reason why we call it ACCATTONE. It is a kind of ironical link to a certain Italianness of the history of magazines, and in particular a tribute to a very good, in my opinion, a very good magazine that was published between 89 and 96 in Italy called Terrazzo, which many people think it's very superficial, but actually it was a very large format magazine which could pass from postmodern furniture made in glass from a Japanese architect. On the next page you would have Ettore Sozza's trip to India, accounting of the many kitchens he had seen and how a kitchen can be very different related to the various populations or places that you meet. And the first reason why we call it ACCATTONE, I will talk about it later. So, this is an image out of the process of the making of the last issue. And as I think most of you don't know the magazine, as I just said, it is very difficult to distribute a magazine by yourself. And so in Germany, we only have a few bookstores in Berlin. Pro, QM, and Motto, we used to have a collaboration with him, and now a new bookstore, I don't recall the name. And so I wanted to just have a small overview of the last issue. We had kind of 12 contributions, starting with a Mexican architect we've met, who for each project she makes a small booklet to let the design process more clear, both for herself, for the client, and for everybody else. And so Frida Escobedo is her name, and we started from 4 pavilions that she had made in Mexico and also in Chicago. And in her work, she really, in her booklets, she refers to both some artistic or historical or sometimes philosophical references, bits of text and diagrams, and we translated part of these booklets into the contribution. Then we have 2 images that inform the magazine, but which didn't make it to become a full content. It is Thomas Demand work on the cave, and it is actually an installation in Milan called Processo Grottesco, so grotesque process, which not only displays his famous photographs of architectural models, but he also exhibits the model, a very large model, to shape this cave, this man-made cave, and also all the, let's call it a visual atlas, because the theme of the art studio is that, the visual atlas of collected postcards you see on the bottom image. And so all these postcards, but also books, are the elements that help him not only to shape this cave, but also to better understand what is the relationship between, let's say, visual culture and this architectural shape. This is another example out of the last issue. It is an artist, a Slovenian artist, Ispan, who was invited at an exhibition that was to be held at someone's house, the White House here. It is a house designed by Belgian architect Stefan Beel, somewhere in Flanders. And the man who inhabits it is an artist, and he decided for his wife's 50th birthday to celebrate with an exhibition. And so they invited a lot of people, including Philippe Dujardin. And Ispan was wondering what would happen to the artist's collection, because as many artists, he also has his own collection of things that he has exchanges with other artists. What would happen to his collection during the exhibition? Because all this material would just have to put down in a cellar to let all the walls and floors free for the temporary exhibition. And so he suggested out of the blue, why don't you transfer the collection at your neighbor's house? And actually the neighbor's house is this one. It's a very typical Belgian house. No comment on the architectural qualities of that house, but finally this is what he did. The artwork is not an art piece, but it is a curatorial take on the building and on the architecture. And so for the magazine, not only we went together and took these 4 images, but also invited each of the people who were involved in this project, the neighbor, the artist, the curator, and himself, to write a small feedback, maybe 1-2 years after the event about what had happened. And finally we found out that the neighbor had become himself an art collector, which was not at all his cup of tea, let's say. We have also a photo report of a museum of mistakes. I will talk a bit more about this later. And a very long interview to architects 51 and 4E, based on a series of documents out of their office. And so far it is the longest interview we've ever published. It's very, very long, but we decided to publish it in full, which is something that you cannot do in a commercial magazine. In a commercial magazine, you have a format, you have to respect it. Here, we said, okay, maybe no one will read it, but we think that the interview is complete, and so we shall provide all these 30 more pages to print it. And around the center of the magazine, we have this series of images out of an exhibition by artist Camille Enrault. She was based in Paris, now she's in New York, and her work kind of works also on the idea of a collection, because she takes and she collects from eBay, but also from images from the National Geographic, and she tries in a single room to compress all the strata, the layers of the history of mankind, from the original myth of, let's say, fertility up to the computer. And a similar work by this photographer, I will talk about it later. Then we have a very strange, for us that's strange because it was the first time that we invited so many people to contribute to a single content. It is a work on facade mock-ups. And so these are these constructions that are built on site for the architects and the client and the builder to check the feasibility of a project and to settle all the last details. And we thought that as one of the themes of the last issue is the dimension of myth in architecture, and as we had been to Mexico, we had this intuition that maybe these facade mock-ups look like totem, and their, let's say, that their imaginary potential ranges far wider than the simple building act, or like let's say, a step in the design process. And then we also have essays with documents from an Italian architect, not an Italian architect, but a Belgian architect who works in Paris, who studied at Resorts and Emilio Basts. And he also has students, and so he kind of collected all these ideas and experiences to tackle the dimension of myth and his idea that postmodernism, or at least a certain part of postmodernism, can be seen as a form of primitivism, as a way to go back as architects to the roots or to the most existential aspects of human being on Earth. And so there are 3 examples that I would like to introduce more before starting a theoretical part of this lecture. And basically my lecture, as I am not a practicing architect, is that I'm not going to show you projects, but I'm going to show you printed pages, contributions, because this is what we do as projects. And so this is, let's say, the first project I want to show you. It is a work we've done for issue 2 with London-based architect Tom Emerson. He has a practice in London called 6A, and he also a teacher at the ETH in Zurich. And so we were interested both in his work as a practitioner and as a teacher. And why we were interested into his work is that because he has a strong relationship with images that very much lie at the basis of his built work. And in his lectures, he almost shows only photographs like these ones, half of which like these ones, are not his own projects. So on the left, it is a picture taken by a photographer. On the right, you have his own projects. And so in his lectures, both the speech but also these visual narratives of the images really explain are the basis of the design decisions. And sometimes an image is what triggered a design solution, like in the renovation of the Ravenborough Gallery in London, for instance. And so our problem was how to translate a lecture, like the one I'm giving, into a magazine. Or we transcribe all the speech, it's going to be 30 pages long, and we print 300 images, or we try some transformation, and so we reduced the 300 images to 30 images that we selected, and we transformed the speech into image captions, which we asked the architect Tom to write down. And so basically, we as editor, he as an architect contributor, we exchanged the roles, like in a Oulipo book. Oulipo is a ouvroir de littérature potentielle, is a circle of literates, mostly based in France, who try to push the boundaries of the book. And so, for instance, Tom was recalling a book that was only made of footnotes. And Georges Perec, maybe you know his books on space. And so he was keen to do this kind of a work with us, but not all architects would be as open as he was to do. And so we selected the images, we selected the order, and then he had to write down these captions, and then he even added footnotes to these captions. And so basically, this contribution, there is no text, it's only paratexts. And this is his work with the students, a mock-up, and the original image that triggered the project. The second contribution is Philippe Bracunier and Christine Dam photo reports in the last issue. I haven't presented these contributions yet in public because they are not very central contributions. Yet they have something to say with the shape of space, the conservation of our memory, and the implicit power relations that are at stake with the conservation of memory. So Philippe had his own work as a photographer, and he tried this photographic report from distant places where data or memory are preserved. You have CERN, you have the Grotte Chauvet, the most ancient cave in which human drawings have been found so far. You have this Mundaneum, etc. And his photographic method can be seen as a very silent photograph, but the enigma raised by the photo is explained with a rather technical language in the captions that he used. So, for instance, this picture here reads Mundaneum, Mons, Belgium. The Mundaneum is an institution that was created in 1910, following an initiative begun in 1895 by Belgian lawyers Paul Leclerc and Henri Lafontaine. As part of their work on documentation science, it aimed to gather all the world's knowledge and classify it according to a system they developed. The Universal Decimal Classification, UDC, still used today. Otley regarded the project as the centerpiece of a new world city. It eventually became an archive with more than 12 million index cards and documents. Before Google this. Otley himself had dreams that one day, somehow, all the information he collected could be accessed by people from the comfort of their own homes. The Mundaneum was originally housed at the Palais du Cinquantenaire in Brussels, Belgium, and in 1929, Otley commissioned architect Le Corbusier to design a Mundaneum to be built in Geneva, Switzerland. Although never built, the project triggered the Mundaneum affair, a theoretical argument between Le Corbusier and Czech critical architect Karel Tiger After several moves, the Mundaneum was relocated to a converted 1930s department store in Mons, where the existing museum opened in 1998. The lack of resources led the institution to store their documents in an anarchic way. With the help of private investors, the building was completely renovated and opened to the public in June 2015. I won't read this part, but it is about a data center, a server, which is dug below ground in Pionen, Stockholm. So it is a former civil defense center where, for instance, WikiLeaks used to preserve their data before stocking them onto the cloud. And the difference with this photographer, Christine Dahm, is that her own take is more lateral, and it raises questions rather than depicting something that is distant. We met her in Mexico City, almost by chance, and we were all puzzled by visiting this anthropology museum in Mexico City, because it's very huge and impressive building, and it is so full of elements of archaeology. And what is very strange, and that Christine placed her camera to emphasize these ambiguities, is that you cannot really discern between what is a replica, or so made in cardboard, or what is original. You can barely see very strange relationships between the pedestals and the exhibit. And also there are elements where you don't know if you are in an architectural model or in a space that was designed for visitors, or in a diorama, so this kind of case rebuilt to place puppets and to show how life was 2,000 or 200,000 years ago. And so the third project I'm gonna show you to introduce the lecture is Pierre Guillon Museum of Mistakes. It deals with a series of documents, all these pictures produced for the magazine, to present a day visit to Pierre Guillon's Museum of Mistakes. It is situated in his apartment in Brussels. Here are our jackets when we went there. And his museum is basically made of books, exhibition posters, postcards, and some prints, but also door handles and many other things. Minor objects, not artwork. Minor form of art in which he lets collide on his eating table here. And so the big question is, why does he call it this museum of mistakes? Is that actually mistakes are the collisions between books or images extracted from the books. These collisions that take place whenever a visitor comes in that case it was ourselves. And so whenever there is a visitor, he performs the collection. His hand is very quick to take out a book and to display you an image and to place it next to the other. Like in this case, we had his own pictures of Le Corbusier's Cabanon, this former magazine of the, I think, 1950s, with this project for a museum of Musée à croissance illimitée, unlimited growth museum, and the circularity of this slides carousel with Joe Ponti's spoon designs, and a leaflet on Borromini's San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane, it's a Baroque church. And so these are for him mistakes. It is ideas that spring for a moment, but actually that are transient. I will read a very small paragraph that we've written down to explain this, because this idea of the mistake and the idea that a collection of elements is a fragile composition and a transient one, a dynamic one. it is not frozen, as maybe in the modern thinking worlds. And so this idea, we found out, is very much at the basis also of our work as editors, and it could be at the basis of the work of several architects. So this paragraph is called Contemporary Art and Class Struggle. The problem with museums is that everything is divided into categories of objects, and not by affinity. By contrast, each exhibit of the Museum of Mistakes is nearly equivalent to the others in terms of value and status, regardless of its support. The items on display are not frozen in a stable relationship of meaning with each other. They are in perpetual movement. Everything is contingent. The visitor produces the exhibit. Uncertainty is paramount. Collisions are fortuitous. Gaps in the collection enable unexpected encounters and mistakes to take place. Le Guillon's compulsive collecting is only in part fetishism, to be intrigued by a partial view of the subject and not the whole, but mostly it is lay ethnographic curiosity, part by part, fragment after fragment, with the ambition to grasp an impossible whole. He says, I only collect to understand, with Georges Perec's Pensée glacée in mind, thinking archiving. Then he reads a slide with a quotation from Jacques Rancière's The Ignorant Schoolmaster. Understanding is never more than translating, that is, giving the equivalent of a text, but in no way its reason. And so, on the basis of these three examples, it should appear obvious that the stance taken by the magazine is to publish documents instead of essays on someone else's work. So we do not write about something, but we publish that something. This means that the magazine doesn't really publish text written by a critic or a historian, but we as editor, we engage directly with the architects, the artists, sometimes other professionals, to create an original content for the space of the magazine. So in our case, as is not the case with all, let's say, independent magazines, the focus shifts from text to every other kind of document. You've seen photos, but we have the slides in Tom Emerson's case, we have the postcards collections, we have the booklets of Frida Escobedo's she made in Mexico City, we have digital archives, we have plans, etc. What we try to do is to release these documents from the status of a mere illustration. Very often in a magazine you have the text and then you have images that try to explain what the text is. In our case it's almost the other way around, so it's the images and these documents that are the most important part of the contributions. And so they are the main subject matter, and these are the fragments that we reassemble together. And the text, as is in Le Guillon's case, come afterwards. And so the idea of a montage of documents, so a collection and a montage, is that there are gaps in between. So through these fragments and the montage, we think that we can let emerge several themes, but without being too specific about these themes. We do not want to over determine the content and the meaning of this content. We want to have them interrelate to one another, and we like to believe that by reading one content, you have also another view on the previous content that you have just read. So every issue of the magazine is like a transversal look, and kind of all contributions can be related to one another. And to come to the first reason why we call the magazine ACCATTONE is that at the end of the movie, you see at the back of the scene is the statue mound. We are in Rome, and it is a very special place. Here you see it in a drawing of the 17th century. It is a place where the ships came from the colonies. It's around the 1st century. And they were full of goods from the colonies, and especially amphoras full with oil. And the oil was put in a container, and the amphoras were not reused. They were broken and piled up, just thrown in a discharge. And after many years, this became a very big mound that still is there in the city. You can see it here. It's near the pyramid of Calicesius. You can see it here, and this is still there today. And we use this image of the statue mound as an analogy to our work, because actually what is strange is that this mound has been made by men, but it has never been designed as such. It has been made by a material gesture and by an economic activity. This mound is also the repository of archaeological evidence, because on all these pieces of amphoras, archaeologists found texts which they interpret, and they kind of inferred from where all this oil came from. And it is also an architecture which has an impact on the city fabric. Strangely enough, or not strangely enough, there is a common etymological root between the idea of text and textile, but also text as a piece of bricks. And so both building, weaving, talking can share in Latin a same etymological root. And so here I want to introduce a more theoretical part, which is based on method. Maybe it could be relevant for you, a student, to inform your project. It is about the fact that if we look back to what we've been doing, we realize that the work at stake in ACCATTONE and what we publish is not only architecture or art, but it is also methods, and the methods that are used by these architects or artists to produce their content often coincides with the methods that we use to publish it. And so, in our view, ACCATTONE is not only a magazine about architecture, but also a magazine about making a magazine. Let me skip a bit because I don't want to make it too long. So, this is important, I think. We try each issue to be complete, but actually, as a magazine, you have a periodicity. Some magazines are monthly, weekly. We prefer to wait until an issue is almost ready, and then we push on the gasoline a bit faster to complete it. But there is a very important difference between a magazine and a book because of this timeliness. We work basically in real time, that is, not with the immediacy of the internet, but just because of the fact that the internet is there, we are allowed ourselves to go slower, to stretch this time across several months. And but finally, to construct each issue as a journey. We do not plan it in advance and to say, okay, we have to fill all this space and then the magazine will be done. We start to think what would be good to have next. And so we have one or two contributions that finally start to take shape. And then we start to infer some themes, and these themes we research as architects, and little by little we articulate around those contents, other contents. And sometimes, of course, chance opportunities, like this trip to Mexico, led to the creation of the content with Frida Escobedo, who otherwise we wouldn't have been able to meet. And sometimes failure to really help to shape the magazine. But every content that we add to this mount, like in the testaccio, it helps to shape the issue until the process goes on and we feel that kind of all the contributions relate to one another and that it is kind of time to stop. And so that we really try to keep or to suspend a bit the pen, and so not to go up to the end of the project to have the final word said on a topic. We, on the contrary, we really insist on keeping a balance between what is final, finished, polished, like a printed magazine must be, no mistakes, no titles, references, text, etc. But also its roughness, some kind of openness, or some mistakes. And why we do this? Because the strong visual orientation that we have, we don't want it to mean that the magazine is a shopping window for architects or for architectural public. We do not want to be a showcase of architects' work, which the reader will just take it as it is, uncritically. We, on the contrary, we want, just like in the Museum of Mistakes, to create a potential for critical thinking, and so to leave some cracks open inside each contribution and among the different contributions. And so the consistency of the collection of contributions that we gather together in the magazine is loose. It avoids being systematic, being top-down, or to be exhaustive. On the contrary, we try to keep something implicit or unresolved. And so we are not at all a manifesto to promote a particular way to do or to think in architecture. Well, this is what we believe. It is still a very personal exploration of me and Sophie as architects, of themes, architectures that we found an interest in, and but nonetheless, there is a kind of experimentation in the magazine, and finally we agree, the four of us, that we try to challenge 4 received ideas in architecture. What are these received ideas? Is that the author, as the unique master of the content of a publication, like in a book, I am the author, I control everything. In a magazine, there is a corruption. The corruption is made by the fact that I don't always agree with the graphic designer, don't always agree with the contributor, he doesn't agree with the work he's done, and finally, it's not only a question of agreement, but it's also a question of not controlling things. Is that so? There is a kind of chance that takes place, and so the author is no longer this master of a publication. There is something that is left outside of his reach. And of course, Roland Barthes had written about this 50 years ago, but architects are rarely the first to grasp, let's say, an idea. The second received idea we try to trigger is that the architect is not the unique master of design and the building process. He also relies, of course, on references, on found forms, found ideas, or material gesture, as well I will show you later. The third element is the primacy of form over process as the utmost intellectual production. And the first, related to magazine making, is the primacy of text over the image. as a natural vehicle for architectural thinking. And so there are editorial devices that are experimented in ACCATTONE, like Tom Emerson, Pierre Levinance, etc. There is a confrontation, contamination, contradiction, or opposition of content across a single issue. There is an insistence on the filiation of ideas from chains of references, undermining the myth of originality. There is a presentation of design protocols more inspired by the minor narratives of surrealism, anthropology, and conceptual art than by the modern cult of an heroic architecture. All these elements contribute to our, let's say, position-taking in architectural culture today. And this freedom to experiment is mostly allowed by the fact that the magazine is independent. As I told you, it is not possible in a normal magazine to publish a very long interview. And this is a very funny case we had with Arnaud Brandeluber. We wanted to publish a small project of his called Antivilla. And so we asked him a few images and the plans, and we just had two questions here on materiality and performance, and another on minor architecture. And actually what he replied with is this picture of his own studio. Here is our email, a few examples of what we have been doing so far, and this is a visual reply to our two questions. I said, oh, there's something here. We can now start a conversation. And finally, we couldn't make it to meet him. And so we made this ping, ping, pong, ping conversation. We exchanged PDFs on which we annotated their images. And so finally, it became a kind of a chain of images that kind of dug into some origins of the project that we were publishing, and also that we're digging in the idea that architecture today is a kind of no longer a central aspect of the built environment. Let's say architects are a bit no longer in power, or no longer sitting at the table of decision-making processes. And so we wanted to discuss with him about these topics, and so it came out the house of Alison Peter-Smithson before its transformation, as an analogy to the work that he did on this manufacture before building the Antivilla. It became a thinking over pop culture in the UK, or kind of a realism that happened in the 50s with Ballard, or sorry, with this parallel of life and art exhibition, etc. And so what was very hard to do here was, for the graphic designer, was how to translate this exchange and to let it readable for a reader. So architecture and the graphic design of the magazine are very strongly associated. And hence the work of the two graphic designers is not secondary to our work as editors. We could consider that we are all editors. Sophie and I are in charge of what to publish and how to tackle architecture, but the graphic designers very often came up with ideas that we couldn't produce as architects, and that altered the meaning of the content we were publishing. And but also the problem with being a magazine based on image is that there is a certain danger of being too seductive with images, and hence the work we do with the tools of graphic design, with this paratext. Gérard Genet, a French theorist, I wrote about these elements, like the title, like the page numbers, the footnotes, that are there in a book, that finally convey other meanings to the book than the simple novel that is printed in it. And so these levels of information, we try to use them on purpose so as to alter the meaning of the magazine. Graphic designers call it grey matter. Grey matter, for instance, is the title, is the mention of the photographer, it is the name of the contributor, this is the palimpsest of his work, and these are illustrations. And all his work, this contribution, was made out of his collection of postcards to create a visual lecture on museology, on the ghost of Miss van der Rohe in several museums in these lands. And also in the ghost of other museums inside the same museums, like it happened here at Räume. Visual narratives are of course nothing new. In the last 100 years, photographers like Giri or Walter Evans, poets like Brecht or Eliot, historians, innumerable artists have explored a wide range of critical methods to use images. One of the main dangers in publishing a lot of images is this seduction. And finally, seduction is almost inescapable. We have to accept it and we have to enjoy it. But we need to go a bit further. And so the question is how to make these images in the visual atlas or in the magazine, how to make them react to one another, how to create not only proximities but also distances, how to create this distance to let them raise questions and not just be consumed. We then try to counter the idea that images are just a smooth flow of images, but to use this imprecision or infiniteness to create this distancing effect, entfremdung. Right? And here is an example with a quite enigmatic project built by this French architect Eric Lapierre. The project as it was unfinished. I don't know its state today, but it is also, like in Pradluga's case, a kind of an anti-villa. Here, as you see in the plan, there is no hierarchy between the pieces of this house. Not really an entrance, not a main hall, not secondary rooms, but a grid of 16 identical pieces, some of which were exterior rooms, to which you could kind of access. And we asked him for the plans, images of the building site, and he gave us these images. And we hadn't noticed it immediately, but they are very hardly reworked in Photoshop. They look like a model. It is very strange. And our graphic designers were totally against the idea of publishing such an image. Because they say, what is it? Or would to publish an image of the building site? This is an image of the building site that has been reworked so as to make it more pretty. And so we started thinking, okay, what can we do? We wrote back to the architect and we said, okay, could you send us the original pictures? Maybe they are more interesting. We are a bit uneasy with this. And the images were there also. And finally, as you see, we decided to publish them both, because one could refer to the other and likewise. Also because in the text that we asked him, he was referring as making architecture like making a model, as a building as the enlargement of a model. and some reasons behind this project, which is quite experimental of some sort, and maybe this is one of the reasons why he had problems with the client and couldn't go back to take other pictures, is that the house is very simply built, and there is only one material for the walls, and he gave us a very nice text. I won't resume it, but this idea, we called it Stanley knife architecture, and there was this idea that the building is actually an enlarged model, and so here there was the perfect proof that a building could be brought back to its status of a model by using Photoshop to make these more uniform spaces. And so we think that with this contribution we kept this balance or unbalance between seduction, a reference to the text, and a kind of let's say, genuinity facing the construction of this house. So here I come to the last part of the lecture, and it is a reflection on architecture, because of course I'm talking about magazines, but we are all here to talk about architecture, and this is also the reason why we do the magazine, is to think about architecture. And so by looking back at the 4 issues that we've done so far, did you let them circulate a bit? Okay. Sorry for the interruption. I wanted to issues circulate so that you can browse, but maybe they are already circulating because they were here on the table. I don't know. So, oh great. Oh, this also. Yeah, sure. I cannot read them. And so the themes we've been approaching so far in the making of the magazine, to just make a very sheer list, are one-on-one scale models, material gesture, triggering pictures, found forms, intellectual bricolage, personal collections, myth and perverse museographies. And I call this section minor architecture, and I use this term quite largely because I think that these themes can be traced back to this notion of a minor architecture. But the definition of what is minor, it is a kind of not a loose definition, but it can be interpreted in various ways. And so minor architecture can be related to the size or the importance of the program, to the political dimension of the project, or to a self-chosen niche, or design aesthetics. And so I wanted to give you these examples, and for instance, some projects that we featured in the magazine reflect particular attitudes through formal experiments, acting like manifestos or anti-manifestos. Let me see here, in the first issue we published I found out Krefeld is not so far, but the pavilion that Robrecht and Dam built out of an unbuilt design by Miss van der Rohe of the golf club. And here is Bas Prinsen, a photographer, in collaboration with architect Anne Oltrop, who made a work on buildings and a pavilion, as you see here, that is not designed by nor the mind of the architect nor the hand. It is designed by caterpillar digging in the ground. And so these ideas have then been transformed into models, photos of the model, etc. Another category of minor projects is that minor is not the project in itself, but it is the design thinking, as is the case with Thomas. And the book he has written with Ihre Nutzer called Never Mother, on the idea of bricolage. In this way, what is minor is the design thinking, in the sense that the architect, the design process is no longer determined by a single idea, the master idea, as in the Renaissance, that is declined throughout all the scales and phases of the project. But the project is made part by part, and each of these parts are equal. There is no longer this hierarchy, and maybe the importance of the design of a door handle is as important as a major construction work to lift the building up of one floor, for instance. And you can see here the Ravengrove project as a very interesting example of this attitude. In seeing how visual narratives or found pictures like this one of the former building before a fire destroyed it in the 70s are the thread, the very tiny thread that pushed the architect to design the building, and not at all consideration of public flows, let's say width of pieces, etc. All the project was like sewn or written after these few hints that they had disposed on the design table. A third, let's say, type or kind of minor projects that we featured, it is linked to the contemporary context of architecture, the economic and political context of scarcity of both money and scarcity of policies. And so for scarcity, maybe as a sign of a resignation, architects kind of retire in a safer space of small projects, house refurbishment, art galleries, and installations. But also furniture design, detailing, interior architecture. And this work of Sébastien Martinet-Barra and Benjamin Lafort, two architects based in Brussels, in Paris, is a way to go back in their practice and to let emerge some themes that cross the different projects. And what is very daring, in my opinion, in their contribution, is that they are not at all afraid to show horrible sketches or elements designed with SketchUp or stolen pictures with a smartphone in an important library, to paste them all together as to show that there is not an image that is more important than the others, that all these images are equal, and what is important is what you build with all these little images. This is a very different attitude that we had with regard with Tom Emerson, in which we had a major narrative and then lexical images. But it is the fourth category of minor architecture that is the most interesting and maybe the most, the closest to the idea of a minor literature, as expressed by Deleuze and Guattari. It is the idea that a minor architecture is not a small project. It can be a very big project, but it is the way in which you carry it out that can make it minor. And it is minor because the building or the process to design the building interferes with the power structures of the process. It opens some possibilities for the users, or for the client, or for the architects, and it challenges established values, or uses like forms, like also gestures, and sometimes by adding more stakeholders. All these tools are used as a means of a strategy to subvert the common sense and the common way a building is made, and so as to kind of offer another possibility to reinvent architecture. And so this category it is very appealing to me because it lets architecture escape from this niche of magazines, of a few clever projects that are only displayed to a few, or to universities, in which I consider we are all very lucky to be in, because they can think about architecture, but going out of this small bubble to really interfere with the built environment. And this demands a very strong courage and large shoulders to be made possible. And I think that the contribution by Architects 51 and 3 and the work in Albania is a good example of that. What is very strange in their work is that, well, they found themselves in a very odd situation where Albania was a kind of an old country because of its historic precedents, but also a very young country because it was very recently that it became, let's say, a liberal country. And they found in Tirana's mayor and then the prime minister a very good client, kind of a prince, who let them kind of organize projects and try to have them organized in other ways than the very systematic and controlled ways that we are used to here in Western Europe. With, of course, all the side effects and negative side effects that come on the way. For instance, to build the tower, you can see as a reflection, it took them 12 years. But also they could open up a space for negotiation with the project. And this negotiation is not only the negotiation of an architect struggling with the builders or with the client with money, but it is a struggle that is also carried out through architectural form. And here we come back to the idea of the museum of mistakes, or of the movable pieces on the board of a visual atlas. It is indeterminacy. It is the project, in their cases, are to always have a strong formal feature. For instance, this is a big dome that was built on top of a gas station. What oddity, very strange. And this ceiling here is quite monumental, but it reveals the structures that lied just above it, that were 3 layers of structures for this slab because the building had to be reinforced every time that had been a political revolution in Albania, a very strange thing. And so they decided not to hide it, but to reveal it by adding the third layer and to let it appear in between the beams. And but what they reached to do, I think very well, is that this form is always balanced by some formlessness, by some parts of the project that are left out of the maniac control of the architect, that are not fully designed, and that can be a space for appropriation. There is a similar attitude with regard to the program. A building is not fit to correspond strictly to a program. A building can be filled out with new programs in the future, in very short future. In the design of this tower, after winning the competition, the program was declared kind of cancelled. It had no meaning because it was just a program for the competition. And then they realized that the people didn't really know what to do with this tower, but they knew that a tower there would be good, so as to be filled with a hotel, and then who knows. And so this kind of attitude, I think, is reflected well in this idea of a man of architecture and of a mistake, because it is a way to let a bit loose the authorship that architects claim over the design process, but also maybe to accept to design a machine, a bâtiment machine that is broken, a bit useless, or unadapted, maladjusted. And I think that this attitude can produce buildings and spaces that are more interesting, more functional even, more sustainable, more user responsive than major architecture made out of our straight line of design. I don't know if I have more time, but I think my lecture ends here, and I would be very happy to take on from your questions if you have, or to display you more the magazine if it's around the tables.
I have one question, because at the beginning you said that your magazine is not a showcase of architectural work. Instead, it should be a way of to invite people to critical thinking. And I'm wondering if your contributions are developed in dialogue with the architects, such as happened with Tom Emerson or Brandenburg, or are there also contributions where architects don't like your proposal and you skip them, or you go further? Or you merge it to something, you develop it to something new everyone is fine with it? And I'm wondering how is the process going, because as you want to put things together which maybe not belong together in the practice mind, and architects seem to be quite self-confident, or say I think. So I think, how is your daily work? Is there also critical?
Well, it is a critical process, and I already announced that also between ourselves and the graphic designers, there is, and also between Sophie and I as architects, we agree 50% of the time, and we disagree 50% of the time. And it is exactly the same with the contributions. I think at first there is a curiosity, and there is a kind of a mutual trust that it is often built quite quickly. For instance, when we invited Tom Emerson, we read books, we took on documentation, that we met him, we had a studio visit, and we found out that he also has an editorial practice. And so from there, the idea was set, and we almost shook hands to say, okay, let's do it experimental, and that was very fun. In other cases, architects really want to remain in control, and so the problems come at the end where they would like another picture or things like that. But it depends. I was really surprised, for instance, by Gabriel Lapierre, whom we had published all these ugly images of the building site, etc. He had nothing to say. He was very happy with the contribution, and he said, I trust you. That is your work. I've done mine, and that was a good attitude. The very big difference, because of course this is not only a question of architecture or graphic design, it is that we invite, the artists invite, their contributions are almost there as to inform architects and architecture over the artist methods. And we've experienced so far that artists are more experienced in handling these editorial devices, in handling materials, and so with them the process is always very smooth, even if sometimes it is very distant. In the case of Camille Hall, for instance, we just received the images and we could do whatever we wanted to, because there was no one at the other bottom of the line. It was just, okay, do whatever you want. In other cases, and this is what we like most, is that there is a confrontation and there is a dialogue, and so there is something critic that happens in this dialogue, and I call it critic not because it is a criticism expressed towards or against the architect's work, but there is a way to open questions through the material that the architect provides, or be it an original material or existing material that he shares. And in Brandluber's case, it was really an unsolicited contribution, because we didn't expect at all to have such a long contribution and exchange with it. And then we didn't have anything to say on the final result, because the final result was so complicated for both us and maybe them, that the graphic designers had to take on, because they hadn't participated to this contribution, and so it was just a way to let someone else in charge of doing things. And so I think that there is a very interesting subject to study a bit more in this role play, in the way of you, also within an architectural project, you can distribute roles that can be very specific, they can be compartmented, isolated, or they can be loose. And I think that is a very interesting thing to work on for the future. What was very funny in the Museum of Mistakes is that the whole contribution was made in 24 hours. So besides a preemptive meeting to say, okay, we need an assistant photographer, a few material, and I will bring food, you will bring wine, it all took place between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. At his house, and we recorded everything, and we took all the pictures, and then it was just, at the end, it was just a matter of selecting the pictures, writing down small chapters, not to be too heavy and not to pin down too many things with the text. And but the contribution was there, and so the performance, the creation of content, and the creation of the format almost overlapped on a single day, and that was a kind of a funny thing to do. Did you know about the magazine before tonight? foundation of this TID tower, where they have a video with Albania's prime minister locked in a lift, in an elevator, with one of the designers, and it was projected on a bedroom, on a bed sheet, in a cellar of an artist who has a gallery space in Brussels called Deborah Bowman. They were in Amsterdam before, and they live inside the gallery. And so this is another nice example of perverse museology and minor architecture, because their kitchen becomes the exhibition hall, and their bedroom here becomes the lecture space. And the architects were sitting here on the bed, and we didn't take the shoes off, but almost.